Chapter 1. Part 2. The Second War was so much worse than the first one. It had drawn in the entire wizarding world. There were no neutral sides. Anyone or anything that had anything to do with magic had been drawn into the conflict. The conflict had engulfed the entire magical world. The conclusion had sadly been almost inevitable. There were no winners. Everyone lost in this war. The Ministry, which, under Cornelius Fudge, had loudly and repeatedly claimed that Voldemort hadn't returned, they had vilified Harry and Dumbledore and anyone who sided with them. They realized their mistake almost a year later, when first he, then Dumbledore, had a public duel with Voldemort after escaping the Department of Mysteries and witnessing the death of his godfather. However, Fudge didn't even have time to make the excuses and apologies of politicians. Voldemort orchestrated a bloody coup, taking over the entire Ministry in a single day. He tried to run things from there. That only lasted a few days. The counter-assault from the Aurors, and led by Dumbledore, an assault that Harry had been furious to only find out about afterward. He had once more been forced to remain at his aunt and uncle's, and told by Dumbledore not to involve himself. Dumbledore's assault had pushed the Death Eaters out of the Ministry building itself. At the time, it seemed like a victory. However, Voldemort lost the Ministry buildings to the assault with only enough resistance to be believable. The victory didn't even have the benefit of significantly weakening Voldemort, since he lost very few Death Eaters and no important ones. The enemy had only been stunned, since Dumbledore and his forces didn't kill, and the few Death Eaters who did die did so by accident, rather than by design. Most were merely captured and shipped to Azkaban. Of course, Voldemort promptly freed the Death Eaters that had been captured at the Ministry. They had remained incarcerated less than 72 hours. Then Voldemort retaliated with scorched earth policy. In something that was obviously pre-planned and pre-prepared, the entire building was destroyed by a gigantic magical detonation, leaving nothing standing and no one alive. It had also taken out most of the people likely to challenge him. Voldemort turned his eyes on other targets, Diagon Alley, Hogsmeade. Both became victims of warfare. Nothing seemed sacred, and nothing remained untouched, and there was nothing that Dumbledore seemed to be able to do about the mounting death toll and rising rate of attacks. More, Dumbledore had refused to let Harry do anything but remain at his relatives', where he was safe. The International Confederation of Wizards had refused to lend aid as the situation had spun out of control. They had tried to blockade the entire island of Britain, hoping to contain Voldemort and his strengthening army of Death Eaters. In response to the attempted blockage, the Dark Lord bided his time by focusing on Britain and waited almost 3 months until after school had begun in the fall, and then he attacked 3 international schools in quick succession: Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, the Salem Academy. He offered those present the chance to join him, and then killed anyone who stood in his way or didn't join him at the schools. Then he razed the schools to the ground. When the ICW convened in another emergency session to discuss how they were going to respond, Voldemort launched a surprise attack on the convention itself. In it, he brought something that completely rocked the wizarding world to its foundations.